My name is Helen, and I am 65 years old. After 40 years of being a nurse, I thought my retirement party would be the happiest day of my life. I was surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues who came to celebrate this milestone with me. The house was filled with laughter, warm conversations, and the kind of joy that makes your heart feel full. But something felt different that evening, something that made my decades of medical training kick into high alert. When I saw my daughter-in-law slip something into my drink, I knew that single moment of observation had just saved my life. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and please hit that like button. This story might save someone's life someday, so make sure to subscribe and share it with others who need to hear this. Trust me, you will want to stay until the end to learn how quick thinking and medical knowledge can be the difference between life and death. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. My life had been dedicated to caring for others at Riverside General Hospital, where I spent 4 decades helping patients heal and families find hope. It was honest, meaningful work that gave me purpose every single day. I raised my son Marcus there too, bringing him to the hospital daycare when he was little and watching him grow up surrounded by the compassion and dedication that defined my career. Marcus is 37 now, my only child, and the light of my life. When he married Sarah 3 years ago, I wanted so desperately to love her like the daughter I never had. Sarah was 32, beautiful, charming, and seemed to make Marcus happy. At first glance, she appeared to be everything a mother could want for her son. She had this way of lighting up a room when she walked in, always perfectly dressed, always saying exactly the right thing to the right people. But there were moments, small ones at first, when something felt off. Sarah had this need to control every situation, every conversation, every decision that involved our family. She would make comments about how tired I looked, how I should really think about slowing down, how dangerous it was for someone my age to live alone in such a big house. The house she was referring to was the family home I had inherited from my parents, a beautiful Victorian worth about $800,000 that sat on 3 acres of prime real estate. I had worked my entire life to pay off that mortgage, pouring my heart and soul into maintaining every inch of that property. It represented everything I had accomplished, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had built for my family's future. In my will, I had left everything to Marcus, assuming that when the time came, he would make the right decisions about our family legacy. But as the months passed, I began to notice how Sarah's eyes would light up when she talked about the house, how she would walk through the rooms with this calculating look, measuring furniture, commenting on renovations that could increase the property value. She would bring up my age, constantly mentioning how difficult it must be to manage such a large property, how much better it would be for someone younger to take care of it. There were other things, too. Sarah would often suggest that I looked pale, that my hands were shaking, that I seemed confused about simple things. She would say these things with such concern in her voice, such apparent love and worry, that even I began to question whether I was imagining the manipulation behind her words. During family dinners, she would insist on serving my food personally, always making sure my glass was full, always checking to see if I needed anything else. At the time, I thought she was being a caring daughter-in-law. Now I understand she was establishing a pattern, creating opportunities, laying the groundwork for something much more sinister. The most troubling part was watching how she had begun to influence Marcus. My son, who had always been independent and strong-willed, started echoing Sarah's concerns about my health and my ability to live alone. He would call more frequently, asking pointed questions about whether I was eating properly, whether I was taking my medications, whether I had considered moving to a smaller place, or even assisted living. I could see how much he loved Sarah, how completely he trusted her judgment, and it broke my heart to think that the woman he had chosen to spend his life with might not have his best interests at heart. But what could I say? What proof did I have? It was all just a feeling, a nagging suspicion that something was terribly wrong. The strange symptoms started about 6 months before my retirement party. At first, they were subtle enough that I attributed them to stress and the natural aging process. After particularly intense family gatherings where Sarah had prepared the meal or brought me special drinks, I would feel dizzy, nauseous, and unusually tired. My hands would shake slightly, and I would have trouble concentrating on simple tasks that I had been doing effortlessly for years. Being a nurse, I knew these symptoms could indicate several serious conditions, so I scheduled comprehensive tests with my family doctor, Dr. Rodriguez, who had been treating me for over 15 years. Blood work, cardiac tests, neurological evaluations, everything came back completely normal. Dr. Rodriguez assured me that I was in excellent health for someone my age, and that the occasional dizziness was probably related to blood pressure fluctuations or dehydration. But the symptoms always seemed to occur after spending time with Sarah, particularly when she had prepared food or drinks for me. I started keeping a detailed journal noting when I felt unwell and what I had consumed beforehand. The pattern was becoming undeniable, but it seemed so impossible, so unthinkable, that I convinced myself I was being paranoid. My best friend Margaret, who had worked alongside me at the hospital for 30 years, was the first person to voice what I was afraid to think. During one of our weekly coffee meetings, she looked at me with the serious expression I had seen her use when delivering difficult news to patients' families. Margaret told me she was worried about how much weight I had lost, how tired I looked lately, and how different I seemed whenever Sarah was around. She had noticed that I was less talkative, less confident, almost fearful in Sarah's presence. When I finally confessed my suspicions about the timing of my symptoms, Margaret did not dismiss them as the paranoid thoughts of an aging woman. Instead, she reminded me that as healthcare professionals, we had seen too many cases of domestic abuse and manipulation to ignore warning signs, regardless of how unlikely they seemed. Sarah's behavior had become more obvious too, at least to someone who was paying attention. She would ask detailed questions about my health, my medications, my daily routines. She seemed particularly interested in my heart condition, a minor issue that required daily medication, but had never caused me any significant problems. She would research treatments online and bring me articles about new therapies, always emphasizing how serious heart conditions could be in elderly patients. During family conversations, Sarah would steer the discussion toward morbid topics like funeral planning, inheritance taxes, and the burden that elderly parents could place on their adult children. She would share stories about friends whose parents had died suddenly, commenting on how difficult it was to handle estate matters when families were not prepared. The most chilling moments came when Sarah would look at me with this expression I could not quite define. It was not hatred or anger, but something colder, more calculating. It was the look of someone evaluating an obstacle, measuring its resistance, planning its removal. As my retirement party approached, Sarah volunteered to organize the entire event. She insisted on handling the invitations, the menu, the decorations, everything. At first, I was touched by her thoughtfulness, grateful that she wanted to make my special day memorable. But as the planning progressed, I realized she was taking control of every detail in a way that felt less like generosity and more like manipulation. She chose the guest list, deciding who should be invited and who should not. She planned the menu around foods she knew I loved, insisting that she would prepare everything herself to make sure it was perfect. Most importantly, she took charge of all the beverages, saying she wanted to create a special signature drink in my honor. The night before the party, I lay awake thinking about everything that had been happening, all the small incidents that had accumulated into a mountain of suspicion. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I would pay attention to everything Sarah did during the party, watch her every move, and trust my instincts no matter how unbelievable they seemed. The morning of my retirement party dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe everything is going to be wonderful. Sarah arrived early to set up, and I had to admit she had outdone herself. The decorations were elegant and tasteful, featuring photos from my nursing career flowers in my favorite colors and handmade signs celebrating my 40 years of service. By 2:45, guests had arrived, filling my home with warmth and laughter. Colleagues from every department at the hospital came to celebrate, sharing stories about patients we had saved together, difficult shifts we had survived, and the countless ways we had supported each other through the years. Former patients and their families stopped by to thank me for the care I had provided during their darkest moments. The food Sarah had prepared was absolutely delicious. She had made all my favorite dishes, from her famous lasagna to the chocolate cake that had become a family tradition. Everyone complimented her cooking, praising Marcus for finding such a wonderful wife, telling me how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter-in-law. Sarah played her part perfectly, moving through the crowd with grace and charm, making sure everyone felt welcome, keeping conversations flowing, and presenting herself as the ideal family member. She wore a beautiful dress, had her hair styled perfectly, and seemed to glow with happiness as people praised her efforts in organizing such a special celebration. But I was watching her carefully now, and I noticed things that others missed. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. How she maneuvered herself into conversations where people were discussing my health or my plans for retirement. The calculating way she observed the house, as if she were already planning changes she would make once it belonged to her. Throughout the afternoon, Sarah made a point of bringing me drinks, always checking to make sure I was staying hydrated, always ensuring that I had everything I needed. She would appear at my elbow with a fresh glass of water or lemonade, encouraging me to drink up because the day was warm and I needed to take care of myself. Her attention to my fluid intake seemed excessive, but everyone interpreted it as thoughtfulness. Guests commented on how attentive she was, how lucky I was to have someone who cared so much about my well-being. Marcus beamed with pride every time someone complimented his wife's devotion to me. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself relaxing despite my earlier suspicions. The party was going beautifully, everyone was having a wonderful time, and maybe I had been imagining problems that did not really exist. Maybe the stress of retirement and the changes in my life had made me paranoid about Sarah's motives. Maybe she really was just a caring daughter-in-law who wanted the best for our family. It was exactly this moment of lowered guard that Sarah had been waiting for. As I mingled with my guests, accepting congratulations and sharing memories of my nursing career, I let myself believe that everything was going to be fine. I was surrounded by people who loved me, celebrating a career that had brought meaning to my life, looking forward to a retirement filled with travel and new adventures. That sense of peace and security made what happened next even more shocking and terrifying. Sometimes the most dangerous moments come when we least expect them, when we have convinced ourselves that we are safe. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, I excused myself to use the restroom upstairs, grateful for a few minutes of quiet after hours of socializing. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and as I walked back toward the stairs, I could see down into the living room where most of my guests were still gathered enjoying cake and coffee. What I saw made my blood run cold and confirmed every suspicion I had been harboring for months. Sarah was standing next to the side table where I had left my glass of lemonade, looking around carefully to make sure no one was watching her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small plastic bag containing white powder. I watched in horror as she opened the bag and poured its contents into my drink, stirring it quickly with her finger, before looking around again to ensure she had not been observed. The entire process took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity as I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, witnessing what could only be described as an attempted murder. My nursing training kicked in immediately, and I forced myself to remain calm and think clearly about what I had just seen. Sarah had just poisoned my drink, and if I went downstairs and consumed it as she expected, I would likely become seriously ill or worse. The white powder could have been anything from a sedative to a cardiac stimulant to something even more deadly. But I also realized that this was the proof I had needed, the concrete evidence that my suspicions about Sarah had been correct all along. She was not just trying to manipulate me or control my assets. She was actively trying to kill me, probably with the hope that my death would look like a natural heart attack brought on by the excitement and exertion of my retirement party. Standing at the top of those stairs, I felt a mixture of terror, rage, and something else. Something that surprised me with its intensity. Relief. Relief that I was not losing my mind, that the symptoms I had been experiencing were real, that my instincts about Sarah had been accurate. Relief that I had caught her in the act before it was too late to save myself. I also felt a crushing sadness for Marcus, who had no idea that the woman he loved was capable of such evil. He was downstairs laughing with our guests, proud of the wife who had organized this beautiful party for his mother, completely unaware that she was planning to make him an orphan before the day was over. Sarah finished stirring my drink and stepped away from the table, plastering that familiar charming smile back on her face as she rejoined a group of my former colleagues. She chatted animatedly about the party, accepting compliments on her organization skills, playing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law with an ease that made my skin crawl. I remained upstairs for several more minutes, watching Sarah's behavior and planning my next moves. She kept glancing toward the staircase, clearly wondering when I would return and drink the poison she had prepared for me. Every few minutes, she would check the side table to make sure my glass was still there, untouched and waiting. When I finally came back downstairs, Sarah immediately approached me with a concerned expression, asking if I was feeling all right because I had been gone for quite a while. She guided me toward the side table where my poisoned drink waited, suggesting that I must be dehydrated and should really drink something right away. The next few minutes required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I needed to appear normal while figuring out how to handle this life-threatening situation without causing a panic among my guests or alerting Sarah to the fact that I had discovered her plan. When Sarah handed me the glass of lemonade, encouraging me to drink up because I looked flushed and probably needed fluids, I accepted it with a smile and thanked her for being so thoughtful. Inside, my heart was racing, but I forced myself to remain calm and think strategically about my next moves. I pretended to take a sip, barely allowing the liquid to touch my lips, then immediately started a conversation with Dr. Martinez, one of my former colleagues, to distract attention from the fact that I was not actually drinking. While we talked about retirement plans and upcoming travel, I managed to pour most of the lemonade into a small decorative plant that sat on the side table. But I also needed evidence of what Sarah had done, something that could be tested and analyzed to prove that she had tried to poison me. While Dr. Martinez was telling a story about a difficult case we had worked on together, I carefully poured the remaining lemonade into a small water bottle I had in my purse, making sure to get enough liquid for testing while leaving some in the original glass. I then excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with serving more refreshments, but actually to call Margaret and ask her to come over immediately. Margaret had left this party earlier to attend another commitment, but when I called and told her I had an emergency that required her immediate attention, she dropped everything and headed back to my house. When Margaret arrived 20 minutes later, I managed to pull her aside and whisper what I had witnessed. Her face went pale as I described seeing Sarah pour powder into my drink, but she did not question my account or suggest that I might have been mistaken. Instead, she immediately started thinking like the experienced nurse she was, asking about symptoms I might experience and discussing how we could safely handle this situation. Margaret suggested that we needed to create a scenario where Sarah would reveal her intentions without putting me at further risk. We decided that I should pretend to drink from a fresh glass while actually consuming only water, then fake the symptoms of poisoning to see how Sarah would react. The plan was risky, but it seemed like the best way to gather evidence of Sarah's intentions while protecting my actual safety. Margaret positioned herself where she could observe Sarah's behavior, and I prepared to give the performance of my lifetime. I returned to the living room carrying a fresh glass of lemonade that contained only the harmless version Sarah had prepared for other guests. I made a show of drinking it in front of several people, commenting on how refreshing it was and how thoughtful Sarah had been to make such delicious beverages for the party. Sarah watched me drink with an intensity that would have been noticeable to anyone who was paying attention. She kept checking her watch as if she were timing something, and positioned herself where she could observe my reactions to whatever substance she had put in my original drink. About 15 minutes after my fake consumption, I began to stage symptoms of distress. I started by mentioning that I felt a little dizzy, then progressed to holding onto furniture for support and complaining of nausea. Several guests immediately expressed concern, offering to help me sit down or get me a glass of water. But Sarah's reaction was completely different from everyone else's. Instead of showing alarm or suggesting that someone call for medical help, she seemed almost excited. She quickly moved to my side, but not to offer assistance. Instead, she started making comments about how I had probably just overdone it, with all the excitement how someone my age needed to be more careful about overexertion. As I continued my performance, pretending to feel increasingly unwell, Sarah's true nature became impossible to hide. While my genuine friends and colleagues gathered around me with concern, offering to call paramedics or drive me to the hospital, Sarah kept discouraging medical intervention. She told everyone that I just needed to rest, that calling an ambulance would be an overreaction, that I was probably just overwhelmed by all the excitement and attention. She suggested that the party should continue, that I would be fine after a short nap, that everyone was worrying unnecessarily about normal signs of fatigue in an elderly person. But Margaret was watching everything, and she was not about to let Sarah prevent me from getting medical attention. When I pretended to collapse onto the sofa, appearing to lose consciousness, Margaret immediately called 911, despite Sarah's protests that it was not necessary. Sarah's mask slipped completely when she realized that paramedics were coming and that her plan was falling apart. She became agitated, almost frantic, insisting that everyone was overreacting, that ambulances were expensive and unnecessary, that I would be embarrassed about causing such a fuss over nothing. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, and I had to continue my performance while they checked my vital signs and asked about my symptoms. I described feeling dizzy, nauseous, and confused symptoms that could indicate poisoning, but could also be attributed to dozens of other conditions. At the hospital, I finally felt safe enough to tell the truth. I asked to speak privately with the attending physician, Dr. Kim, and explained everything that had happened, including my suspicions about being poisoned over several months and my certainty about what I had witnessed that afternoon. Dr. Kim took my concerns seriously and immediately ordered comprehensive blood tests, including screens for common poisons and toxic substances. I also provided the sample of lemonade I had saved, which was sent to the lab for analysis along with my blood work. The results came back within 2 hours, and they confirmed my worst fears. Both my blood and the lemonade sample contained significant levels of digitalis, a cardiac medication that becomes extremely dangerous when given to someone who does not need it or when administered in excessive doses. Digitalis poisoning can cause exactly the symptoms I had been experiencing for months: dizziness, nausea, confusion, and cardiac irregularities. In the concentration found in my drink, it would have been enough to cause a fatal heart attack, especially given my age and the stress of the party environment. Dr. Kim immediately contacted the police, and within an hour, Detective Williams arrived to take my statement. I provided a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the months of suspicious symptoms to witnessing Sarah poison my drink to her strange behavior when I appeared to be having a medical emergency. The detective was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about timing witnesses and physical evidence. The sample of poisoned lemonade would be crucial evidence, along with the medical records showing digitalis in my system, despite the fact that I was not prescribed that medication. When Detective Williams went to my house to speak with Sarah, she was still there helping to clean up after the party and expressing concern about my condition to anyone who would listen. Her performance of worry and devotion continued right up until the moment she was placed under arrest for attempted murder. Marcus was devastated. He could not believe that the woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, had tried to kill his mother. The evidence was overwhelming, but it took time for him to accept that Sarah had been systematically poisoning me while pretending to care about my health and well-being. The investigation revealed even more disturbing details about Sarah's plans. She had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, listing herself as the beneficiary. She had researched digitalis poisoning extensively, learning how to administer it in doses that would simulate natural heart problems in elderly patients. The legal proceedings that followed were both satisfying and heartbreaking. Sarah eventually pleaded guilty to attempted murder and insurance fraud, receiving a sentence of 25 years in prison. The evidence against her was so overwhelming that her lawyers advised her not to risk a trial that could have resulted in an even longer sentence. During her sentencing hearing, Sarah showed no remorse for what she had tried to do. Even when given the opportunity to address the court, she maintained that she had been trying to help me by ending what she called my suffering and loneliness. Her complete lack of empathy or understanding of the magnitude of her crimes was chilling to witness. Marcus filed for divorce immediately after Sarah's arrest, and the process was finalized within 6 months. He was devastated by the betrayal, not just by Sarah's attempt to murder me, but by the realization that their entire relationship had been built on lies and manipulation. He had to accept that the woman he thought he knew and loved had never really existed. The months that followed were difficult for both of us as we worked to rebuild our relationship and process what had happened. Marcus blamed himself for not seeing the warning signs, for not believing my concerns about Sarah, for allowing his love for her to blind him to her true nature. It took time and several sessions with a family counselor to help him understand that he had been a victim of manipulation as well. I had to undergo medical treatment to clear the accumulated digitalis from my system and address the damage that months of low-level poisoning had caused to my heart and nervous system. The doctors assured me that with proper treatment and monitoring, I would make a full recovery, but it would take time to rebuild my strength and stamina. The emotional healing took even longer than the physical recovery. I had to work through feelings of betrayal, anger, and fear that someone so close to our family had tried to kill me for money. I also had to address the guilt I felt about the impact this had on Marcus, and the ways my suspicions about Sarah had created tension in our family relationships. Margaret was my rock throughout this entire process, providing emotional support, helping with medical appointments, and reminding me that trusting my instincts had saved my life. She helped me understand that being suspicious of Sarah's behavior had not made me paranoid or crazy, but had actually demonstrated the wisdom and experience that came from decades of working in healthcare. I made significant changes to my living situation and financial arrangements. I updated my will to include charitable donations, ensuring that my legacy would extend beyond just providing wealth for my family. I also implemented security measures at my home and established protocols with my doctors and friends to monitor my health and safety more closely. Most importantly, I decided to use my experience to help others who might be facing similar situations. I began volunteering with organizations that support victims of domestic violence and elder abuse, sharing my story to help people recognize warning signs and trust their instincts when something feels wrong. The experience taught me that evil can wear the most charming masks, and that the people who seem most caring and devoted can sometimes harbor the darkest intentions. It also reinforced my belief in the importance of trusting our instincts, maintaining close friendships, and never being afraid to seek help when we feel threatened or unsafe. 6 months after Sarah's sentencing, Margaret and I took the European vacation I had been planning for my retirement. We visited museums, enjoyed incredible food, and celebrated the fact that I was alive to experience these adventures. Every morning when I woke up in those beautiful hotel rooms, I felt grateful for the second chance I had been given. Looking back now, I realize that my medical training and decades of experience caring for patients probably saved my life in more ways than one. Not only did it help me recognize the symptoms of poisoning and understand what was happening to my body, but it also taught me to trust my observations and take action when I suspected something was wrong. Marcus and I have rebuilt our relationship stronger than ever. He has learned to value my insights and experiences, and we have developed new ways of communicating about difficult topics and concerns. He is dating again now, and while he is understandably cautious about trusting new people, he is slowly healing from the trauma of discovering that his wife had tried to murder his mother. Sometimes the people who smile the brightest hide the darkest intentions. Trust your instincts, they might just save your life. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that it is better to be suspicious and wrong than trusting and dead. If someone close to you is making you feel unsafe, if their behavior does not match their words, if you are experiencing unexplained symptoms after spending time with them, please seek help immediately. Have you ever had an experience where trusting your instincts saved you from danger? Share your story in the comments below, and please hit that like button if this story reminded you of the importance of staying alert and protecting yourself. Subscribe to hear more stories about survival and resilience, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their safety and well-being matter more than anyone's feelings. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you have the strength and wisdom to protect yourself when danger comes disguised as love. Stay safe out there, and never ignore that voice inside you that says something is not right.